on the head end of over a mile of train out of Canadian National's Kirk Yard near downtown Gary, Indiana. The remote-controlled locomotives are power on the yard's hump job this frosty December morning and are pulling a new track to be classified on the hump. Kirk Yard is the Canadian National's major classification yard in the Chicago area and one of the biggest yards on the railroad's nearly 20,000-mile system. The yard came in part of the railroad's purchase of the Elgin, Joliet and Eastern Railway, the remnants of which will be the focus of this video presentation. Kirk Yard is rather unique amongst modern classification yards in that there's only one way in and out. The hump lead and these trains are all you'll see east of the yard. Pulled out of the receiving yard, the train is pulled far enough to switch over to the hump lead and can begin their slow shove up the hump itself, classifying cars one by one. The hump is over a mile west of here and the process will be a long one. Two EJ&E veterans are on today's hump set, both being SD38-2s. The 668 was built new for the EJ&E in November of 1975 and at one time wore an attractive bicentennial paint scheme for the railroad. In recent years, the unit had the distinction of being the first EJ&E unit painted into CN colors and has been captive in Kirk Yard hump service for nearly a decade. Like the 668, the 662 was also built new for the J and has been in captive hump service for many years. In most cases, once a locomotive is put into hump service, it lives out the remainder of its service life on it. The repetitive industrial backdrop of Gary will likely be the last things these units will ever see for the remainder of their CN career. Controlling the hump set is a rebuilt Alstom SD40-3 lettered as GTW 5950. The unit is one of several so-called Grey Ghost SD40s on the CN roster and formerly saw service on the Kansas City Southern. The history of these Grey Ghosts is quite interesting. See the links in the description below for more information. Just south of the hump lead is the NS Chicago line. Eastbound CSX train M326 to Grand Rapids, Michigan is exercising trackage rights on the line on their way to Porter Junction. Just north of our location is U.S. Steel's massive Gary Works steel plant. U.S. Steel owned the EJ&E up until it sailed to the CN, and the J provided 24/7 plant switching services here on top of their function as Chicago's outer belt route. This plant switching is now done by the Gary Railway, which themselves own a good amount of old EJ&E power. Looking north up Virginia Street, we get an elusive look at the GRW in the form of their Highline job, shoving coke loads off the CSX up the line to be unloaded into the plant stockpile for steelmaking. This coke originated on CSX train B157 and was produced at U.S. Steel's coke plant in Clairton, Pennsylvania. The two lead helpers will be cut off as the train is made it a majority of the way up the grade. GRW SW1200 324s, the former EJ&E 324, which itself was built as Missouri Pacific 1132 in 1964, while SW1001 GRW 223 was built as the Birmingham Southern 223 in January of 1974. We'll see many more unique sights and sounds as we explore the modern Canadian National rendition of the Elgin, Joliet and Eastern. The EJ&E's Eastern Subdivision, now known as the Canadian National's Matteson Subdivision, runs just under 50 miles between Kirk Yard in Gary, Indiana, and East Joliet Yard in Joliet, Illinois. Looking at a rough map, it's quite evident that the line was designed as a belt route with as many connections with other railroads as you could cram into the length of the line. Between these connections with other Class I railroads, connections to other CN lines, the expanse of Kirk Yard, many online customers, and easy expandability of existing infrastructure, the J was seemingly a dream for the CN to acquire, and they did just that on February 1st, 2009. The line has since become one of the busiest mains on the entire Canadian National system. In this video, we'll explore the eastern half of the old J. Beginning at Kirk Yard, we will make our way railroad west, exploring all major connections along the line and numerous spots in between. Use this map as a guide throughout the video as we'll move rather quickly the further west we go. And be sure to check out the links provided in the description for more in-depth history on the line and other helpful information. From here, we'll begin our tour of the Matteson subdivision and head over to a spot very familiar to the channel, Pine Junction on the far west end of Kirk Yard. The sun is quickly rising over Clark Road on a frosty November morning, and the railroad action is already well underway. Overhead, a yard switcher is pulled west for headroom as CN train M337 speedily begins their westward journey to Iowa. Looking west, we get another look at the 337, as well as a glimpse of a favorable signal for westbound CSX train I-003. Moving up the road, we catch a train we saw on the Pine Junction video. CSX local Y310, a transfer out of the railroad's bar yard in Chicago, is entering Kirk Yard behind two different SD40 variants this morning. The Y310 continues their creep into Kirk as the switch job retreats back into the yard. Another day at Clark Road finds different power on the pull downs, this set consisting of a wide cab SD40 as well as a GP38-2 still wearing the blue and red paint scheme of the Grand Trunk Western. Spinning 180 degrees, the Kirk Yard mill job begins their short journey into Kirk with coke loads off the CSX. Kirk Yard runs this daily job to transfer coke and coal trains between the CSX interchange at East Curtis and the Gary Railway. This train will make a horseshoe shape around Clark Road, and we'll see it again in just a few minutes. All the while, another yard switcher is pulled up to the bridge behind two SD38-2s, the leader of which is still painted for the Bessemer and Lake Erie. E 676 was the former 666 and was renumbered by the CN in 2019. Bad voodoo must be ever present all around Kirk Yard. Boating through the lake that is Clark Road, we make it to the other side to watch CN train A441 drop down into the yard. This short-haul manifest makes a daily run to Kirk Yard from the Norfolk Southern's large classification yard at Elkhart. Leading the train is a former BNSF-9, now a CN AC-44C6M rebuild. Throughout this video, we will watch a very much changing roster of diesel power on the CN, consisting of many new rebuilds as well as units going into retirement. Trailing on today's train are more rebuilds, the CN 8308 and 8309. These are classed as SD75I ACCs and were rebuilt from CN SD75Is. The units were rebuilt at Progress Rail's plant in Muncie, Indiana, and at the time of recording in October of 2024 had not yet turned a wheel in revenue service. Inbounds to Kirk Yard experienced quite the drop here at the west end. The location immediately west of our vantage point is known as Stockton. It's out with the old and in with the new as train A490 enters Kirk Yard with 3 former Union Pacific -840Cs. These units were brought down from the Mesabi Iron Range and from here will be sent to Homewood, Illinois for long-term storage pending retirement. A quick break in the action means we can take a look at the west end of Kirk Yard. Yard crews are on standby as the brick west end tower looms to the right. Signs inform us that we're 46 miles from Joliet. To the north, the mill job is hard at work switching a mix of empty coal and coke hoppers out of U.S. Steel for eventual interchange back to the CSX. The train is on a track known as the Edgemore Lead, which itself funnels into the former EJ&E Lakefront line. We'll leave Kirk Yard for a brief exploration of this unique little branch line and take a quick trip to South Chicago. We're along the Lakefront line in the Robertsdale neighborhood of Hammond, Indiana on a chilly day before Thanksgiving. The location of the Lakefront line leaves no question to its name as the line closely parallels the southern shore of Lake Michigan. This former EJ&E branch was at one time double-tracked and originally constructed to serve U.S. Steel's long-abandoned Southworks in South Chicago. Times have since changed, and the line now exists to provide the CN access to Cleveland Cliffs Indiana Harbor Works 3 miles east of here in East Chicago and the Illinois International Port in South Chicago. This work is done by the week-daily L512 local out of Kirk Yard, who today have just finished their work at the steel plant and are now slowly meandering their way west of the port. train is CN 6018, a rare SD40U rebuild that, like the 2100s we saw earlier, had rather recently come down to Kirk Yard from years of service on the Mesabi Iron Range in northeastern Minnesota. From here we'll follow the train to South Chicago. The Lakefront line is the poster child of branch line railroading, with stick rail and close quarter urban and industrial scenes along its entire length. We're just west of Calumet Park in the east side neighborhood of South Chicago, and perhaps to deter crime, several streets including 99th Street here have been walled off to vehicular traffic at the tracks. The train has gotten permission into the port and is now on the last leg of their 10-mile journey up the branch. Backtrack 5 miles to Whiting, Indiana and await the train's return. The line is closely paralleled by the NS-Chicago line for a vast majority of its length. At Front Street, Amtrak's Floridian makes an appearance as we wait for the train to return. With their quick work at the port complete, the train tiptoes their way back east to Kirk Yard. We're back at the west end of Kirk Yard. While the mill job continues her switching, CN's L537 transfer run to Glen Yard departs behind a pair of former Illinois Central EMD SD70s. From here, we'll head over to Ivanhoe Junction and begin our tour of the CN Matteson subdivision. A different pair of Illinois Central SD70s are getting their work cut out for them as they get another L537 up to speed. The 38-unit fleet of IC1000s have been a staple of Chicagoland railroading for years, and we'll see many examples toiling away in local service as we follow the J West. At Ivanhoe, the CSX's former Michigan Central Porter branch departs the rails of the IHB and runs just under 19 miles east to a junction with the Norfolk Southern Chicago line in Porter. The line is used by the CSX trains to and from the IHB, accessing their own XB&OCT main at Willow Creek Junction, as well as the Chicago, Fort Wayne, and Eastern Railroad, who use trackage rights to Tolleson Junction, 5 miles east of here. Coming up next at Ivanhoe is CN train M343, which is a daily manifest to Winnipeg, Manitoba. Another rebuilt AC44C6M, CN number 3379, is leading the train, which is the former GCX and before that BNSF 4524. Those of you that have followed railroads for the last decade may remember City Rail's roster of leased ES44ACs. Most of the fleet has since been purchased by the Canadian National, and as of the making of this video at the end of 2024, all are in service retaining City Rail colors. A brief lull in train action lets us take a look at 9th Avenue and our surroundings in Gary. To the west is Klein Avenue in the city of Hammond, who constructed a controversial wall between the two in 1981 to keep out toxic floodwaters that had washed down 9th Avenue. The wall was intended as a temporary solution to the problem, but remains to this day. The 9th Avenue dump just west of us continues to be classified as an EPA Superfund site, and not much else exists in this secluded pocket of Gary. Big Brother is always watching on the CN. Shadows are rising quick on this warm October Saturday as CN train L515 approaches from the railroad's Markham Yard in Homewood, Illinois, though they won't be making it very far. The Chicago, Fort Wayne, and Eastern's daily manifest to the IHB is exercising trackage rights on the CSX Porter branch as they return east to their eventual destination of Fort Wayne, Indiana. As is typical for the train, a vast majority of today's L515 consists of inbound interchange traffic off the Indiana Harbor Belt. From here, we'll head south to the Black Oak neighborhood of Gary and Loon Junction. At Van Loon, the Old J crosses Norfolk Southern's former nickel plate Chicago district and has seldom used connections in both directions. As a result, the junction is broken up into 3 separate control points. Westbound CN train A491 is working upgrade as they approach our vantage point at the 25th Avenue grade crossing. IC Class SD70 number 1000 is next at Van Loon with train L536 from Glen Yard. The 1000 had its white silk stripe restored by CN Shop Forces in early 2024. Beneath the shadow of 8094, we've reached the diamond at Van Loon Junction. We're at the end of the platted but undeveloped Black Oak Road, which ends just west of the tracks. Another L515 is approaching the junction at Van Loon. Like the one we saw at Ivanhoe, the train will have to wait for cross traffic on the NS. The train is daily Norfolk Southern Manifest 177, which runs from the railroad's Calumet Yard in Chicago to Chattanooga, Tennessee. The Chicago district sees little traffic when compared to volumes on the former Conroe-Chicago line, with this manifest and a handful of stack trains being the only regular traffic to put up any resistance against the CN. The engineer on L515 wastes no time getting the train back up to speed on the last leg of their trip to Kirk Yard. Train A406 to Memphis is next and is led by another former BNSF-9. Daylight is rapidly fading on this cool and damp late September evening as we glimpse a signal for one more train. Looking south, we see the train making its way through Griffith. The train is M399, a daily Toronto to Kirk Yard manifest. This train came off the CN South Bend subdivision at Griffith. With the day coming to a close, we'll head south to the well-known Griffith Junction. Wood Street at the north end of Griffith has always been one of the more photogenic spots along the J. It's not too often you see a Class 1 main line cut straight through such a residential area. Around the corner to the southwest, the J Main crosses CN's former Grand Trunk Western South Bend subdivision at grade. Connections exist in almost every direction, allowing trains to move freely between the two main lines. Two westbounds on the J, both of which will be going straight through and not connecting to the trunk, are approaching our vantage point, but the dispatcher has a situation on his hands. Out of view at the junction, a westbound stack train is actively swinging off the trunk and choking the line down to one westbound main. So the M337 seen it left will have to wait to cross over here and follow the L521 at right. The L521 is a Kirk Yard to Joliet transfer run to feed the few remaining locals based there. Those around during the EJ&E days will fondly remember this as the line train. A restricting indication, and the M337 is lined up to follow closely behind the L521. The M337 is a daily manifest out of Kirk Yard that runs the CN's former Chicago Central and Pacific line to Waterloo, Iowa, and serves the general purpose of feeding the CN's Iowa division. The train is already running several hours behind this morning as the crew tries their hardest to keep the very long train moving. The next indication gives us a promising sign that our next train will be diverging onto the eastbound South Bend sub. The train is M394, a daily manifest from Kirk Yard to the railroad's McMillan Yard in Toronto, Ontario. This is the reverse of the M399 we saw earlier. The west-to-east connection the M394 is using is known as the Kirk Y and sees the passage of 6 to 10 trains daily. We'll head around the corner to Colfax Street and check out a few trains on the South Bend sub. The South Bend subdivision is the former Grand Trunk Western Main Line and today serves as the Canadian National's main route between Chicago, Michigan, and Ontario. Just about every train on the line either comes off or goes onto the J at Griffith here, and in some moments this side of the junction can become quite congested. Leading today's A492 is CN 2761, which is the former City Rail 1215. The 2700 series former City Rail Chivos are PTC equipped and can lead trains. With the A492 out of the way, the A491 can swing onto the J and head for Kirk Yard. Looking west, another signal has popped up for another westbound to swing onto the J. It isn't long for the next headlight to appear to the east. The train is westbound intermodal train Z149 from Montreal and is bound for the former Illinois Central Markham Yard at Homewood, Illinois. Unlike the last two trains, this train will use the Joliet Y and continue west. October 6, 2024 was a good day for Patch City Rail Power, with today's E149 being led by the former CREX 1327 and 1432. Perhaps the most iconic location on the former J are the double diamonds at Griffith Junction. A railroad park exists immediately north of the tracks with plenty of EJ&E relics on display. The South Bend and Matteson subdivisions cross a grade here, making Griffith a great spot for hours of train watching. We've moved to the south side of the tracks to watch an intermodal repo train connecting off the trunk and onto the J, much like the Z149 we just saw at Colfax. Grand Trunk era signals still guard eastbound moves on the connection track. A small yard still exists just west of the junction for local industry work. Westbound train L595 is next at Griffith, led by the interesting combo of an H2 painted BNSF Gevo and BC Rail -944CW. This train is a transfer bound for the BNSF at Eola, and upon being interchanged will become BNSF train HCNI GAL to Galesburg, Illinois. L503 from the BRC in Chicago is next. Note both the veterans unit leading the train and the dead in tow -840C bound for storage. Now west of the junction on the trunk side to catch another L515 heading to Homewood with an eclectic array of diesel power on the head end, including more -8s bound for storage. An eastbound indication is lit up for another L503 from the BRC to hop onto the J and head to Kirk Yard. Traffic is sparse on this end of the trunk, but the L503's late morning appearance provides a reliable daily move to catch across this stretch of the CN Elston subdivision. The L503 begins life as CN train A446 from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. After making the needed setouts and pickups at the BRC, the train becomes L503 for the remainder of their trip to Kirk Yard. EJ&E artifacts can be found everywhere. You just have to look hard. In downtown Dyer, such is the case on the Hart Street Crossing bungalow. At Dyer, the J crosses the CSX Monon subdivision at grade. In the distance, we see CSX train M642 from Avon, Indiana, destined for Bar Yard. This train will hop on the Elston subdivision at Maynard Junction a few miles north of here for the remainder of their run into Chicago. With CSX out of the way, it's now time for the CN to run trains. An extra Z149 that originated in Toronto is approaching our location behind two ES44 AC GEVOs. CN train M302 is next, led by the railroad's Illinois Central Heritage Unit. The M302 is a unique train on the J in that it's one of the only ones that does no work anywhere in the Chicago area. The train originates in Winnipeg, Manitoba and runs to Toronto, Ontario. Despite having both Canadian origin and destination, it's most efficient to run the train through the United States. The train will diverge onto the South Bend sub at Griffith. a track geometry car are on the headpin of eastbound train Z148, which is the reverse of the 149 we saw earlier. The eastbound trains include auto-rack cars from the Homewood Autoport Terminal on the Illinois Central. We've moved west to Lake Street to catch westbound train M301 led by the former City Rail 1316. Our final train at Dyer is eastbound train M340. This train originates in Winnipeg and will use the South Bend sub east of here to run to the Norfolk Southern's large classification yard at Elkhart, Indiana. We'll head 5 miles west across the state line and into Chicago Heights. On the east side of Chicago Heights, an L515 is returning from Homewood with a nice variety of EMD power. Fans of the J may recognize this location from the infamous Tornado vs. Train video, where an EJ&E crew tries their best to outrun a severe storm. Fragments of the long-abandoned interchange yard with the Chicago Heights terminal transfer still exist just south of the J. We'll take a quick moment to check out a few trains on the seldom documented Chicago Heights terminal transfer. Much like the BNSF's Los Angeles Junction Railway on the West Coast, the CHTT is a wholly owned operating subsidiary of the Union Pacific, running UP power and crews, but on paper exists as an entirely separate railroad. This YCH-72R remote job is the daily train out of the Union Pacific's yard center that feeds the CHTT, and could technically be considered an interchange job. As evidenced by the long string of 86-foot auto parts boxcars, Ford Motor's large stamping plant in Chicago Heights is the largest shipper out of the CHTT, though the network of industrial trackage serves many other online customers, including transload facilities, scrap yards, plastics and chemical plants, and most notably, several railroad-related industries, including Omaha Track and Greenbrier Rail. On a much warmer summer day, we catch another 72-hour remote job departing CHTT rails for Yard Center. Leading the train is an interesting combination of 3 rail power built RP20BD gensets as well as a GP15-1. The remote-controlled switch units will put on quite a show tackling the very hilly track profile of the CHTT. We'll make a quick chase of the train before returning to the J. At 12th Street Junction, the train departs CHTT rails and hops onto the Union Pacific Villa Grove subdivision for their short trip back to Yard Center in Dalton. As of the making of this video in January 2025, Yard Center has the distinction of being the last place in the country you can still see gensets in Class 1 service. Just over 4 miles north of 12th Street is the village of Thornton, Illinois. We'll take one last uncut look at the train as they continue their return trip to Yard Center. Back on the J, we've made it to Chicago Heights Junction. Here, the Matteson sub crosses the Villa Grove subdivision at grade. The junction is also the former spot of the famed J Tower. An east to south connection track exists here, but sees seldom use. The first train at the Heights this snowy December morning is CSX train M648, which runs from Georgia to the BRC's clearing yard. CSX exercises a good amount of trackage rights over the Union Pacific through here, with several trains using the line daily to access Danville and Point South. Next up is another M337 led by CN SD75I 5714. Since Gary, the line has been dominated by quiet zones. Chicago Heights is the only other municipality you can still hear the blissful noise of Nathan air chime products ringing through the air. We've moved south of the Diamonds for our next train. Note the clear Mopac heritage of the short signals guarding the Villa Grove side of the plant. Don't let the Gevo horn fool you. 4 variations of EMD SD70 types power an L515 West toward Matteson and the eventual destination of Markham Yard. Final train at Chicago Heights is a Union Pacific Autorack train running as a UP MAS YCX. From here we'll head an additional 3.5 miles west to the line's namesake, Matteson, Illinois. Like Griffith, Matteson is also home to an important junction between 2 CN main lines, those being the J and the former Illinois Central. A railfan park exists here as well, complete with another EJ&E caboose on display, as well as an elevated train viewing platform. A modern crossing gate can still tell a huge story. A rather intricate junction was constructed here after the CN takeover, consisting of a track loop bookended by Ys on both sides, allowing trains to move between every possible combination of directions. The upper Y connecting to the Illinois Central end of the junction is known as Swede. A Z148 not too far out of Homewood is on the first leg of their trip as they swing off of the IC and down to the J at Matteson. While the railfan platform is an impressive structure and worth the visit, it does not offer the best framing or vantage point on the connection. We'll head over to the Metro Electric platform just west of here for a better look at the connection in use. The Metro Electric District parallels the CN's former IC Chicago sub, and its stations offer many unique views of trains traversing the line into the city. The EJ&E 531 isn't the only caboose on display in Matteson. While waiting for the train, the southbound Amtrak Illini passes our vantage point with its unique consist of far too many Superliner coaches. The L515 to Homewood, the transfers between Kirk and Glen Yard in Chicago, Manifest to Iowa, as well as stack trains bound for Homewood will all use this connection to access IC rails. An L537 to Glen Yard hops off the J behind two Illinois Central painted SD70s, as well as an experimental LNG SD40-2W that will be used as local power at the yard. Glen Yard is located on the CN's former Golfmobile and Ohio Joliet sub and is home to several industry locals as well as one of the railroad's interchange points with the Union Pacific. The train will take IC rails into downtown Chicago before getting onto the GM&O near Bridgeport. Our last train of the evening on the IC is train Z194, which is a daily Homewood to New Orleans stack train. Tonight's rather short train will run the Illinois Central the entire length of its route to Louisiana. The train will make setouts and pickups in both Memphis, Tennessee, as well as Jackson, Mississippi on their trip down the old main line of Mid-America. Back on the J, the EJ&E side of Matteson Junction is known as Low. A separate east to south connection track exists here to streamline train movements between Kirk Yard and Point South down the Illinois Central. A very late L595 to the BNSF makes an evening appearance at Matteson. The train will work Joliet before continuing to Eola. A much more gloomy day at Low finds westbound train A491 to Wisconsin Rapids behind rebuilt CN 3386, which is the former BNSF 4560. West of Matteson, the line chokes down to a single track at Control Point Robin. Empty crude oil off the IC is westbound on a dark and gloomy New Year's Day. Head 6 miles west of here to Frankfurt. West of Robin, the rail infrastructure and surrounding landscape becomes quite uninspiring, filled with nothing but open fields and recently developed subdivisions. One exception is Frankfurt, which is home to a passing siding as well as an old pump house. GEs head west with a steel train bound for interchange with the BNSF at Eola. The train is meeting CN train A490 from Wisconsin Rapids in the passing siding. This train originated from U.S. Steel's Gary Works and is bound for the company's Big River Steel in Arkansas. The A490 will have to wait for a westbound L595 before continuing their trip east. The train will work East Joliet Yard on their way to Eola and will leave the two ICSD-70s behind for an L520 crew to run back east with early tomorrow morning. Trailing on today's A490 is GCX ET44AC number 2029. Some of these former GE demonstrator lease fleet Tier 4 GEVOs were purchased by the CN, but as of the making of this video in January 2025, very few remain in GE colors. With the aforementioned quite boring landscape withstanding, we'll jump ahead 14 miles and reach the western end of our tour, the former EJ&E's East Joliet Yard. East Joliet Yard was at one time another major classification yard much like Kirk. Today it's a shell of its former self with only a small handful of industry jobs based out of it. All is quiet at the yard today as we glimpse a few more Illinois Central SD-70s in local service. The CEFX 1548 is likely destined or pulled from Motive Power Resources in Minooka, Illinois, along the former EJ&E's Illinois River line a few miles to the west of here. An L594 that came off the BNSF late last night is awaiting a new crew to take the train east to Kirk Yard. East Joliet continues to be a crew change point between the J's Eastern and Western subs. Today, the J's Western sub is known as the CN's Lakefront subdivision and has connections with the railroad's Waukesha, Waukegan, and Freeport subdivisions, allowing trains from the Chicago area to easily access the CN's former Wisconsin Central network into Wisconsin and Minnesota. geographically south, but timetable east of the yard is Rock, the rather uncreative name for the junction where Metra's Rock Island district crosses the Matteson sub at grade. In the distance, we get a look at both the junction as well as a Chicago-bound Metra commuter train pounding the diamond. With the commuter train out of the way, the same A440 we saw at Frankfurt departs the East Joliet run-through track with a fresh crew to run the train the remainder of its trip to Kirk Yard. Set up just south of Rock at the Washington Street grade crossing. We're back at Washington on a much warmer October evening. Eastbound CN train M336 from Green Bay, Wisconsin is receiving its final crew for the remainder of its run to Kirk Yard. Night's fallen on Joliet by the time the crew is ready to proceed. Today's train has been plagued with numerous mechanical issues, and tonight's crew will try to make quick work of their remaining 46 miles to Kirk Yard. Very interesting train will be following the M336 east. You might remember me discussing the imminent retirement of CN's Dash 8 fleet earlier in the video. In an amazing twist of fate, two of the venerable GEs have been put in charge of repo train X724 from the Mesabi Iron Range with a long string of flat cars bound for long-term storage on the Illinois Central. We'll depart EJ&E rails entirely and chase the train late into the night along the former Illinois Central main. Kankakee, Illinois is located roughly 60 miles south of Chicago city limits, and one could consider it the absolute outer limits of the city's metro area. The city's Amtrak station is located at milepost 55.9 along the former IC main. To put that to scale, the Matteson Metro station we were at earlier is located at milepost 28.6. It's now just past 9 p.m. While waiting for the Dash 8s, the distant sound of EMD 645s fill the air to the south. The seldom documented nighttime Kankakee local has come to life, and we'll do some industry work here in town. Unknown at the time, the X724 had run into opposing traffic on the J. The train would finally roll through Kankakee a little after 10. We'll head another 25 miles south for one last look at the train at Gilman. (11 p.m. at Gilman, a site only known to overnight truckers and, of course, the railroad. An unfortunate turn of events with the station lighting here, but all in a day's luck. The 81-car train will continue to Champaign, Illinois, where a new crew will take the train further south down the IC early tomorrow morning. The 2004 was built as Chicago and Northwestern 8505 in June of 1989, while the 2040 was built for the CNNW a year later in the summer of 1990 as their number 8541. Both would end up on the Union Pacific roster before being purchased by the Canadian National in 2012. In recent years, much like the CN 6018 we saw earlier in this video, both units saw extensive service in northeastern Minnesota hauling ore across the Mesabi Iron Range before taking this train south in October of 2024. This will be the last train the two will run and, like the flat cars they're hauling, will be put into long-term storage upon reaching Centralia the next day. The only constant on the railroad is change. For a parting shot, we've returned to the beginning of our story. Two EJ&E SD38-2s, the 663 and 657, are switching the west end of Kirk Yard. While most trains are nearly unrecognizable from the days of the J, ghosts of the railroad can still be found just about everywhere. Whether as the Elgin, Joliet and Eastern, or the Canadian National, the J network has always been important to Chicago railroading and will continue to be for a very long time. I hope you've enjoyed this video production, and as always, thanks for watching.